Alright, so today we're doing a dungeon tier list. I haven't done one of these in a while, but with Sunder Doctrine out and being a dungeon enjoyer, I thought what could be more fun than doing a tier list. This is in chronological order to the best of my ability. I think I'm pretty good here. I might have messed up somewhere in the middle, but we're just going to go with this. Starting with Shattered Throne, which is very much like Vogue. It is a nostalgia trip, that's for sure, and nothing else. It's been power crept. The rewards aren't that great anymore. So we're going to put it in the D tier, and that's just until it gets inevitably updated, which will happen, somewhere down the line with either new weapons or revamped weapons or whatever, which I will enjoy, as long as the boss encounters as well are updated, because again, everything is just so power crept. You can one-shot everything. Probably the best place to go and start solo flawlessing if that is something you are looking for. And Pit of Heresy is a fun experience, but it's just gonna it's C tier. I mean, it is a fun aesthetic, and I think it is one of the coolest looking dungeons out there. Definitely not the coolest looking though, but with how the rewards work in this dungeon, the weapons are basically the destination weapons for the moon. It's not great. There are people who have been doing this dungeon for years and still trying to get the ship for their collections in order to get a certain seal, and that reward structure is so silly that there's no bad luck protection in there, which there absolutely should be. Now, Prophecy, I think, is a really fun dungeon as well. I am very fond of this. I'm putting it in B tier. You can see we're kind of getting better. We're getting better as time goes along here, and that's usually how this works. The more time and refinement with these dungeons and just improving upon certain mechanics are really cool. The aesthetic of Prophecy, if you have never done it, it's amazing. It's really cool, and Rainbow Road is probably one of my favorite encounters in any dungeon. You're like, how could you say that about a traversal area? It looks amazing. The scale of it is great. The openness is amazing. I think overall this dungeon obviously is not the best. That's why it's in B tier. It might even be like a B minus if I could put it in a B minus. Just because again, it has also been power crept like Heresy and Shattered Throne has. But the weapons got reworked, and some of them are actually really, really good. And not all of them obviously, but it's definitely a fun dungeon, and with the Red of the Nine right around the corner, you kind of hoped that it would be these three getting revamped. Maybe not Prophecy, since it just got revamped, like I said. Maybe Heresy, Duality, and Spire of the Watcher, like they're doing, because let's be honest, Spire of the Watcher has zero good weapons in my opinion, and they all needed to be reworked. But yeah, Heresy and Shattered Throne definitely fall into that category of having weapons that aren't good, power crept, so having a contest mode and updating them would be great, allowing new players to access this content maybe without buying Forsaken or Shadowkeep or the dungeon keys, whatever they have to buy to get this stuff, is a cool idea as well. But, that being said, Ghost of the Deep is a solid dungeon to give out for an experience, and I think Spire is pretty good, but we'll get to that in a second as we're going to talk about Grasp. This dungeon I'm going to put in like a B plus if I can, if it'll let me. Oh my gosh, there we go. So it's above Prophecy in my opinion. I do think it has its downs in some cases with the Fallen Shield encounter and how long it is, and trust me, we're going to talk about long encounters once we get to that point. But yeah, Grasp is a really cool dungeon. It has a very fun traversal where you're racing against time and these mines exploding. And yes, sometimes your Sparrow will explode for no reason after you hit the grab lift, and that's annoying and you die, or whatever. But the boss is really fun. The feel of this dungeon and the way it was done is really great. This is another dungeon that would be fantastic to go back and revisit the weapons in this. Ice Luna could be really fun right now. 1,000-Yard Stare was one of my favorite weapons in Destiny 1, but it's definitely not as good as it was in D1. At least I don't think it is. And I haven't gotten the roll I wanted on that sniper anyways. I just had super bad luck with that drop. Gatherhorn coming back was great, and it definitely allowed rockets to enter the conversation, but Gatherhorn itself is not really good in the current meta, but we don't really care about that. I think overall as an experience though, Grasp is really fun, and not to mention the Ogre gave people a really good place to go and test out certain damage strategies, and well, that's very beneficial because of course we don't have a testing range to go and test out certain weapons and builds and damage rotations. So having the Grasp of Avarice Ogre, I forget what his name is or the community name, but having him to go test out stuff is really, really good. Now this is gonna go, Duality is gonna go on B- as well. I am a sucker for the Cabal, and I'm a sucker for Eris Morn and all that stuff. So I love the aesthetic of this dungeon as well. That's something you're going to hear me talk about a lot, because you do dungeons a ton if you're farming for certain things or getting triumphs or solo flawlessing, and the look and feel of a dungeon is very important when it comes to enjoying your experience. The weapons, again, are mid now. They've been power crept, but there are a few exceptions. Lingering Dread is actually a pretty solid option with Chill Clip, although disorienting or blinding GLs in general aren't really good outside of endgame content, because you're probably just slaying out in a normal dungeon. Why would you need to disorient when you can just murder something straight up faster with something like Tenacious Mastery? The only thing that's holding this dungeon back as far as the overall feel goes is the bugs are really annoying. I remember losing a solo flawless to a goddamn bell for no reason, and that's just like, come on. I had it in the bag, I was surviving, and the bell killed me, which the bell is the main mechanic of this dungeon, and I'm not sure if they've fixed this bug. I've only done this dungeon a little bit in between, the kind of the honeymoon phase of the dungeon has faded away, so doing it repeatedly or staying in an instance for a long time, I think, contributed to the bell bugging out. And obviously if you're doing a solo flawless, you might take a little bit longer than if you're running it with 3 people, and that's why that bug would happen. But regardless, that was super annoying, and also the lore of this dungeon is really cool. So again, B-, it's definitely a middle of the road dungeon. That's a great experience. Of course, Big Chungus is in there, so you gotta shout out Big Chungus. And if Chungus wasn't in there, we're probably looking at a D tier. No, I'm kidding. But it definitely contributes to the overall feel of the dungeon. And yeah. Now we have Spire of the Watcher, everyone's favorite dungeon, because you get to hear Osiris in your ear for the entire damn dungeon, just complaining. And can you blame him? This one's a little bit tough, because I do enjoy doing this dungeon. I really, really do. But the weapons are just, they're horrible. I genuinely don't think I've used a weapon from this dungeon for more than like 5 seconds. But the armor, being said, is really cool. I do enjoy the aspect of essentially ascending the spire and then descending the spire and preventing it from blowing up. It's a cool idea, and it was definitely executed nicely, and I do think this dungeon is going to benefit from weapons being redone, and it's going to be a very fun experience in Rite of the Nine. But I think again we're going to sit somewhere in the C tier. Hierarchy of Needs is also criminally slept on, although I do think that there are other bows that are better in that exotic slot. Like obviously Lemon right now is really good, Trinity Ghoul is up there, Tiku's Divination is very solid as well, Wish Ender, Vergalas Curve. I think there are bows that are better, but certainly it's up there. I just don't think I enjoy repeatedly doing this dungeon because of the lack of reward for doing this. Like the weapons they're horrible. You have to have good weapons in order for a dungeon to be worth doing again and again and again. And aside from that, is the dungeon fun to do? I think it's okay. I just don't enjoy it enough to go back and do it that much. With that being said, you know, I'm not opposed to it being in Rite of the Nine because, again, I think it needs to be touched up. The weapons need to be better, and that might make it a more enjoyable experience because you're doing the dungeon for a valuable reward, right? Challenging content is supposed to be rewarding, and if you take away the reward, then it's just banging your head against a wall for nothing. So, although that being said, it's not a hard dungeon, it's just not fun, in my opinion. Speaking of not fun, we have Ghost of the Deep, which I think is hated on for the wrong reasons. A lot of people have problems with the traversal parts underwater, and listen, I get it, you don't want to be Ariel from Little Mermaid, you don't want to be under the sea, and it does take a while, right? I was watching speedrunners though, and they were zooming through certain parts of the underwater portion. They're speedrunners though, the average casual player isn't going to have those techs, and they're also not going to oob so that they can pull their fire team forward. You know, they're not going to do that. That being said, I actually kind of enjoy the underwater stuff. You know, you can crucify me as much as you want in the comments, but I think it breaks up the normal gameplay loop of the game just a little bit for a little enjoyable immersion into being underwater, which is cool. It is slow and it is overdone. I think now looking back with hindsight, being outside of Season of the Deep and not constantly doing seasonal activities where you are also underwater, it allows you to look at it more objectively, which is the encounters. The encounters are the most important part of any dungeon design, and after that comes the weapons, right? Are the weapons rewarding enough? And there are certainly some weapons in this dungeon that are good, and they're going to be made better in Rite of the Nine. So, in my opinion, this is an A tier dungeon. Why is it A tier? Because everything but the first encounter is really, really well designed. Ekthar has so much ad density, and getting to damage takes a little bit of work, and yes, the underwater mechanic there I think it shouldn't be used in that area, or you should have a way to go faster under the water. Maybe some kind of skill expression that you can do under there, which you can. There are some ways you can go faster under the water, but I do think it's annoying in the encounter to have that. But you know, that being said, it's not overly annoying. You can also do Ekthar really fast if you know the rune placements underwater and you don't need to have a map up constantly. You can do it pretty fast. Obviously you have to manage ads well, and you also have to have a really decent damage strat for Ekthar, but there's so many things that you can do against him that will just destroy him, and you can get through that pretty fast. Samuma is annoying as well. She teleports a lot. There are ways to work around this. Using Divinity is probably the best way to work around this, and there are some other damage strats out there that are, again, super advanced that make Samuma really easy, but I do think this boss does require you a lot of things to get to damage, but it's challenging, right? And that's the thing I enjoy the most about dungeons, is having challenge. Now, if the first encounter wasn't so long, this dungeon wouldn't feel nearly as bad as it does, because it will reward you for finding an optimal strategy for each boss, as well as just knowing what to do for the mechanics and doing them fast and well enough. And the thing about the first encounter is there's no way for you to do it faster, right? Unless you're just shatter skating across the map, which is, you know, something that not every player, again, is going to do. There's no way you can make it go faster, right? You can't just magically know what ogre is going to spawn before it spawns, or something like that. You have to wait for it to spawn, then you have to follow the trail, kill all these ads, to then eventually kill a Lucent Hive to get a symbol. Then you have to go back to the main area, find that symbol after you kill the wizard, and get your deep sight and dunk on that symbol. It is a long process for no reason at all, and it has no place in an encounter that's essentially the opening the door encounter that we have in many other dungeons and raids. And again, you cut that down from 4 to 3, you'd feel the difference a little bit, or you cut it in half to only having to do it twice, and that encounter would be so easy and so fast, and the rest of the dungeon would happen just so much faster as well. and the overall experience would be improved. Warlords is a dungeon I don't think gets talked about as much because of recency bias for Vespers and Sunder Doctrine, and rightfully so. We'll give these two their fun in the sun shortly. Warlords gave us undoubtedly one of the best sidearms in the game, and the introduction to probably the best new archetype of any gun in the game, which is of course rocket sidearms. Indebted Kindness is fantastic, and let's be honest, there's really not any other weapon from this dungeon that is good except Buried Bloodline, which is an exotic sidearm as well. So, you know, two sidearms that are fantastic. Buried Bloodline can give you Devour and access to Weaken. It's really, really strong, and also kind of slept on, but with the way that legendary sidearms work, the rocket sidearms particularly, we're getting Lotus Eater in Act 2. So with all of these legendary sidearms, why would you run Buried Bloodline? Because, you know, you can have Lotus Eater on with Wish Ender, or, you know, The Call or Tenacious Mastery on with Lemon. So, you know, why use an exotic slot for Buried? But you should, because it's good. But overall, this dungeon is amazing. You know, we kind of go back to Spire, and we're ascending this castle, and it has this Elden Ring vibe to it, where you know, you see normal stuff. It's just a castle with a bunch of traps and whatnot. Once you get to the top, you're like, okay, this is not an ordinary castle. This is some fucked up hentai shit with Ahamkaras, and you have the fucking pufferfish up there as well. The way this dungeon works, the final encounter, is similar to the way I wish the first encounter of Ghost worked. If you play everything right, you play your cards right, you get all of the lanterns or lamps or whatever you call it, the totems, excuse me, I guess that's what they are in the final encounter from killing the giant Scorn dudes. You can do a ton of damage before getting to the top and doing your first damage phase, your first full damage phase, you know, rotating between the floating platforms. And you can make this boss go ridiculously fast if you know what you're doing and if you execute everything perfectly. Pairing something like Kyros on Thunder Crash Titan with this on Prismatic is insane, because you get extra melee energy or extra super energy from melee kills with Kyros now. So if you put on, like, you could get off a lot of Thunder Crashes and destroy him. So this is like the model of how I think dungeon bosses should be. If you can handle the ads and kill the Scorn dudes and handle the punch mechanic on the little Scorn Wraiths, then you will be rewarded by having a longer damage phase and being able to do more damage to the boss. Also, we talk about aesthetic and feel. Warlords is up there, and Indebted was definitely worth grinding for. So was Buried Bloodline, and this is a great example of a dungeon that is worthwhile. And while we are there, yeah, of course, we're going to talk about Vespers Host and how good Vespers is. It is the hardest dungeon in the game, and it's not close right now. I mean, maybe Sunder Doctrine will be behind it once we get it up there, but I don't think so. I think the passage of time will continue to have Vespers separate, and that's why, part of the reason why it's in S tier. But we also got enhanceable weapons for the first time from dungeons, and we got, I mean, every single weapon in this dungeon except Gravitic Arrest is really, really good. Even then, I think Gravitic is probably good this season, at least with Particle Recon. And at least I don't use it. You might have a PvP role you like on it, whatever. But Chill Inhibitor is great. Velocity Baton is great. The Auto Rifle is great. I'm blanking on the name right now because I haven't used it that much because I haven't gotten the role I wanted. But every other weapon is great. Icebreaker is pretty solid as well. And everything about this dungeon was great for a while. I think that Ranix has kind of been destroyed in terms of balancing, and that fight just doesn't feel good at all now. It's not the strategies that were worked out by the community before the bugs got fixed were really good and rewarding, and not necessarily high skill, but did take some practice. Now, it feels like even if you pull off an impressive rotation on Maniacs, you're not really getting a whole lot of a reward. Single damage doesn't really work as well anymore, and AoE effects like Ignitions don't work as well as they used to. So it kind of feels like the uniqueness of this boss has been taken away, while also not allowing conventional means to do that much against this boss. Anyways, that being said though, the final boss is a rewarding experience because you do have so much going on, and it rewards playing your life as well as being good at doing damage while watching your intake of damage. And it's very similar to Rolk or even the Witness fight, where you have to pay attention to where the lightning is depending on where you do damage and what your strategy is. And if you don't do that, you're gonna die, and obviously if you're dead, you're not doing damage. So it's high octane, it's high stress, there's a lot going on, and well, I say that and then people will just stand on the fuel tank and or have their barriers up, and so it's as high skill as you make it. If you're bouncing around, you do have to be cognizant of where you are and where the lightning is striking. But again, the fuel tank strat or the back left platform where you're hanging out on top of the nuke room, that strategy is a lot safer. And if you're doing a solo flawless, I would recommend that spot. But if you're just doing it with friends, the fuel tank or wherever else is a really decent strategy. And yeah, this boss is not as hard as the first boss is now in terms of damage rotations and what you need to do. You can really just sit on the fuel tank and pump Queenbreaker or Thunderlord or whatever, and this boss is going to fall down pretty quickly. First encounter is another good example of a really good first encounter because you can make it go faster if you know how to handle the panels correctly, how to get the nukes in as quick as possible, destroying the brigs really fast as well so that you can dunk the nuke and all this stuff. It's a really good way to handle a first encounter by rewarding players for slaying out, as well as having good strategies for taking out mini bosses as quick as possible and executing on those strategies as well. Now we have Sunder Doctrine, which I think probably falls above Ghost but below Warlords and Vespers, and the sole reason for this, and the passage of time might change this, but the Zoetic lock set being bugged still leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Not enough to affect its ranking that much. I think it is an S tier once we bring it up here, but it's hard to tell because on contest, if the bug didn't exist, there's a possibility that the Zoetic lock set takes like 5 seconds for a lot of teams because you're actually getting crit damage. And a lot of people were trying out Queenbreaker, and Queenbreaker will probably slap once the bug is fixed. But for now, the strategy is probably still Sleeper or Anarchy or Chaos Reach or whatever you end up doing for high damage. Thunder Crash works pretty well here. Also, Nova Bomb is decent depending on your overall strategy. There's a lot of things that work, but once the bug is fixed, everything else that didn't work because of the bug will work. Whisper, Queenbreaker, Still Hunt, and so many other things. Celestial Nighthawk will work here as well. There's some builds out there. I think I saw Sneak using a Star Eater class item with Storm's Edge, which is crazy that Storm's Edge is actually viable on this boss, but it makes sense because you can hit multiple of the Shriekers at once, and it's one of the few supers that does that. And with Star Eaters, you're increasing your damage, and I think it was a solo 2-phase on the Zoetic lock set with Storm's Edge, which the only other solo 2-phase I've seen is Geomags with Chaos Reach, and obviously Chaos Reach is the best super in the game right now because of Geomags, or at least it's up there. But having whole strategies change in the dungeon because of a bug, not great. And you're probably wondering, well, why is Vespers up there if that's the case? I still think the experience, the weapons, the loot, the lore, just it takes it above that. And yeah, you could say the same thing about Sundered as well. And I think over time this dungeon might move up for me, depending on how that stuff shakes out. The lore for this dungeon is great as well. I won't try to spoil that much, but obviously there's some stuff going on with the Hive Pantheon in this dungeon that is really cool as well. And the whole pyramid ship needing a person to rule it is also really cool. And over time, the pyramid ship is trusting you more and more and needs some kind of ruler to, or in this case, a pilot to give it direction. So that's pretty cool. And obviously the weapons from Sundered are really good as well. The origin trait is insanely good, and a bunch of new perks also make these weapons pretty solid. I will also say the solo experience for this dungeon definitely waters down the overall ranking. The first encounter is very, very, very similar to the first encounter of Ghost and the Fallen Shield encounter in Grasp, and that if you're doing it solo, it takes so long. Even if you're doing the correct lens placements and the most optimal lens placements, it takes you forever. You can't carry multiple lenses, which would be really nice in a solo experience, so that you can just kill a bunch of subjugators, have like 4 lenses, and be able to do a full rotation of lenses without having to go find a subjugator, kill it, or go into a room, kill it, get out of the room so it respawns, and then come back and kill it again. You have that to contest with, and it definitely is annoying, especially because Zoetic and the final boss are super easy to do and actually take less time on solo, or at least the first encounter makes everything feel longer, and it shouldn't. You should be able to do it faster. First encounter of Sundered is very long, but the second encounter is actually probably one of my favorite encounters in any dungeon ever. It lets you do damage pretty much however you want, for as long as you want, as short as you want, as many or as little adds as possible. So there's so much variation in your runs each time you do it, and yeah, this is definitely above Ghost for me. Ghost is like an A- or just an A+, and right on the precipice of S tier for Sundered Doctrine. So I think passage of time will tell how much I enjoy doing this dungeon again after the honeymoon phase is over, and after I get all the rolls that I'm looking for on each weapon. The exotic from this dungeon definitely leaves a lot to be desired because it's honestly not that great, but the origin trait makes just about every single one of those weapons extremely viable. The hand cannon's great, just in general. Pair it with Lucky Pants with elemental honing and it could probably do some insane things. The shotgun with PvPs, actually it's good in PvP, it's got some good PvE rolls. The scout rifle looks amazing. Firefly Volt Shot gave it to me already. And the Trace Rifle, I haven't messed around with it too much. It's okay. I mean, Trace Rifles are just, they're very niche and not that great in general. But yeah, this is the tier list. Feel free to screenshot it and, make fun of me in the comments, whatever. This is opinion-based and based on my own experiences with these dungeons, so yours might look a little different. I am kind of happy that this ended up, spread out somewhat evenly. We got 2 in S tier, 2 in A tier, 3 in the B tier, 2 in C, and of course 1 in D. But this can change over time as well. These dungeons down here could get reworked, specifically Pit and Shattered Throne could use a rework eventually. Grass is probably next up on that list, since, Prophecy and Ghost of the Deep as well as Spire are getting reworked, and then Duality would probably be next with its weapons, and then maybe enhanceable versions of Warlords somewhere way down the line would be a cool thing to see. But for now, honestly, this is my tier list, and if I could only do 2 dungeons for the rest of Destiny's lifespan, I think Warlords and Vespers would be good choices here if I were to look at it like that. But each of these dungeons have different things, they do different things, they feel different, they look different, and it's honestly amazing to have this level of content just with dungeons. I'll probably do a raid tier list at some point depending on how this video does, and if you guys like this kind of content, for sure I will come back and revisit that. So yeah, but let me know by liking the video or leaving a comment, and See ya.